Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the continuation of the Midwest Culturally Inclusive Conference. Tonight's session is entitled Racially Conscious Trauma Informed. We have some community standards throughout the Midwest Culturally Inclusive Conference. Kaden is going to share a full copy of the statement in the chat, but I'm going to verbalize a few key points. Please obtain consent before taking any photos, screenshots, or copying text that is not yours. Please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. When you are speaking, please turn your camera on and identify yourself. Speak clearly and slowly so that our live closed captioning service is as accurate as possible. We are using live closed captions throughout the MCIC sessions. If you do not see them on your screen already, you're going to want to look at your Zoom taskbar and click the CC button or the More button, and then click View Live Transcript. If you have any questions or difficulties with this, please message us in the Zoom chat. The QR code on your screen links to the Campus Climate YouTube page, where we will be housing most of the recordings for this conference series. We do have at least 6 videos already posted there, so you can see some from earlier this week and last week. Most of the sessions are being recorded to make them as accessible as possible for those who cannot attend live. We will also be posting them in our conference web app, Huva, and like I said, they will live on our Campus Climate YouTube page as well. If you have questions during tonight's sessions, please feel free to message your hosts and co-hosts. We are listed here. We also have our colleague, Natasha Guy. Oh.
Oops, that was my bad. I went to enter somebody in and actually hit the mute button. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Okay, well, just message us if you have questions. I don't know how much was muted, but and we are also monitoring our Campus Climate email account throughout tonight's session and throughout the entire conference. And lastly, I would like to introduce tonight's session, Racially Conscious Trauma Informed, presented by Kenda Roman. Racially conscious trauma is a term coined to capture the deleterious impact of race-related stress, racial harassment, racial violence, witnessing violence, and discrimination on mental health functioning. Similar to other trauma, racial trauma shares similarities to PTSD. This training provides an understanding of how historical trauma presents today, recognizing the impact of racial trauma, describing symptoms of racial trauma, understanding similarities and difference between trauma-informed care and racially conscious trauma-informed care, and describing actionable steps and strategies to address racial trauma in a racially conscious way. I will now turn things over to Kenda.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Racially Conscious Trauma. Thank you for joining me on tonight on what I call and what I have introduced as Slump Day. Slump Day comes after Hump Day, which is Wednesday, and tomorrow is Pump Day. So Wednesday is Hump Day, Thursday is Slump Day, and Friday is Pump Day. So I truly want to thank you for taking out the time, your time to know and to grow with me. So let's get started. Historic racial trauma, understanding the impacts of historical racial trauma. Throughout our time together tonight, I may stop and take the temperature check, and at any time that you feel that you need to self-care throughout this presentation, please feel free to do so. Do whatever you need for your self-care, for your mental health. Please take out that time to do what you need to help yourself. So who am I? Kenda Roman, I'm a school counselor at Eisenhower Elementary School, but I'm also a licensed professional counselor. I'm also a chaplain with the Beloit Police Department and Foster Funeral Home. And I also pastor a church. I know a lot of times people say, when do you have time to sleep? Yeah, sleep is not something I do a lot of. It's rare, but when I get it, it's good. So I also go by Pastor K. But my favorite title in the whole world is Mom. That's my favorite title, unless she says it 60 times and it is not so favorite anymore. My educational journey. Graduated from Beloit Memorial, went to the University of Wisconsin at Whitewater, went to Concordia University for my master's in school and professional counseling, and finally finished up with a second master's in curriculum and instruction with a concentration in trauma and resilience. My work history, I was a 17-year veteran kindergarten teacher. And then I went voluntarily over to a different school where I was counselor for 2-3 years. And I am finally at Eisenhower Elementary School, where I have been there 4 years. And it is I'm currently at my retirement location. I hope, yes. So why are we here? Tonight? To understand and address and work to undo the burden our BIPOC colleagues, students, and families are experiencing and have experienced, with the end goal of not perpetuating these historical racial traumas in the context of our schools and our community. And for this presentation on tonight, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. What are we going to take away? You'll be able to define historical racial trauma and how it differs from other forms of trauma. You'll learn how to conceptualize your instructional practices through a racial trauma lens. And finally, you'll be able to understand the role of historical racial trauma in this correlation to the school and community. Let's get started. Racial trauma. Racial trauma, also known as race-based trauma or race-based traumatic stress, refers to the stressful impact or emotion one experiences with racism and discrimination. Racial trauma may result from racial harassment, witnessing racial violence, or experiencing institutional racism. So we're going to watch this quick video just to give us a quick introduction to racial trauma. The look. Racial trauma is not just something Black and brown people experience regularly. It's something health experts say they are born into. What makes it traumatic is how you experience it. So as you notice on the bottom of our triangle, we have intergenerational historical trauma. Trauma is sometimes passed down through generations. And what that means that if I experience trauma and it affects my mental health, there's going to be an impact on my social life, my family life, and my economic life. If I have experienced race-based trauma, I have learned how to move through the world that may not be adaptive to me. So then I pass that maladaptation on to my children. Race-based trauma is what children are learning, and they are passing it down to their children. Children live, we know what the saying says, children live what they learn, and without any interventions, which can look personal, familial, systemic, those things carry forward and move throughout generations. One example of this is the colloquial phrase, what goes on in this house stays in this house. So during the phase of slavery, this phrase could potentially protect children from being physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally abused, sold off, and or killed. But it also produced adverse childhood experiences. The modern day implications of what goes in this house stays in this house. The way that great-grandmothers, grandmothers, and mothers experience racism affects how they parent their children. 400 years later, the BIPOC community is still utilizing this as a way to protect their children. But here's where it comes into a little bit of an issue. It repeats and prolongs the adverse childhood experiences. So again, we've got one generation to the next generation. In addition to physical and sexual and emotional abuse, we now see how it adds the mental illness component, mental health component to it. Problematic drinking or alcoholism, illegal street or prescription drugs, right? So we're going up now to the disruption of the neural development. The prolonged exposure to race-based trauma leads to long-lasting wear and tear on the body and brain, and it disrupts and impairs the social, emotional, and cognitive and neural development of a child or a child that's growing up too. So experiencing ACEs without supportive adults can prolong the toxic stress or what is known as race-based trauma. What does that look like for our young people today? The youth today don't use the phrase, what goes on in this house. They have shortened it up to one word, snitching. I'm not going to tell you what I saw because it might cost me my life. It is an example of intergenerational trauma passed down from generation to generation, and we can trace it all the way back to slavery. If I tell who's planning to escape, it could cost me and them their lives. So we're going to do an activity. I want you to put your fingers up in the air, all 10 fingers. I need you to put them up in the air. I don't need to see you if you don't want, but put them in the air at your house. And so what we're going to do, if a phrase resonates with you, or you have experienced this phrase, I want you to put a finger down. If a phrase that I read resonates with you, or this is your lived experience, I want you to put a finger down. Here we go. Put a finger down if you almost always see members of your race, sexual orientation, religion, and class widely represented on television, in the newspaper, and in the media in a positive manner. Put a finger down if your boss is the same race as you. Put a finger down if someone's tried to touch your hair without permission. Put a finger down if you have ever been the only person of your race in a room. Put a finger down if you know and have experienced racial battle fatigue on your job. Put a finger down if you've ever experienced the phrase, You people. Put a finger down if you are unsure whether or not Derek Chauvin, the officer in the George Floyd case, would be found guilty. Put a finger down if you studied the history and culture of your ethnic ancestors in elementary and secondary school. Put a finger down if you've ever gotten the look. Put a finger down if you've ever shortened your name or given your nickname because your name would be mispronounced. And so now take a look at how many fingers you have up. This is another form or another experience of racial trauma, what we see in racial trauma, even today, even on our campuses, we get the look, right? Our students get the look, BIPOCs get the look. And so we want to help our students to navigate because not having understanding of navigating could cost you your life. And so we'll get further on into our discussion. We'll talk about racial literacy and what that looks like, because not being racially in tune could cost you your life. So traumatic experiences activate your body's fight, flight, or freeze response. It triggers the release of stress, cortisol, and adrenaline. This release causes a range of physiological changes, including increased heart rate and heightened mental alertness. This stress response is designed to help you survive threats of danger by either running away, fighting back, or pausing. It is the equivalent of revving a car's engine for days or for weeks. Just revving that engine is what racial trauma feels like. Once the experience is over, the body gradually returns to its usual state. But given how rampant racism is, BIPOC often repeatedly experience racial trauma, which can lead to the development of a range of symptoms. If we go back to the pyramid, the triangle that we had, if we go back, we can see the disease and disability and social problems. The revving of racial trauma can cause the constant revving or feeling like you're revved up. We can see that it can cause diseases and disability and social problems. And we're going to get more into that later on. This is what racial trauma feels like. Remember I said it's the revving of your system. I want to take a moment and I just want you to stop and I want you to think about what's going on physiologically in your body at this moment. Think about, are your hands sweating? Are your eyes shifting back and forth? Is your heart beating faster? Because with racial trauma, even if there is a perceived trauma, again, it's like a revving car. The hypervigilance or greater apprehension. You experience heightened fears of engaging with people in certain environments following an experience of racial trauma. So when we think about that, engaging with people in group projects, because I already have this heightened awareness or heightened apprehension about going into something because I've already experienced some racial trauma. We talked about the symptoms that lead to the racial trauma that leads to development of several or a range of symptoms for BIPOC people. Anxiety and depression. Over time, you'll start to experience some mental health symptoms typically associated with anxiety and depression. Nightmares, flashbacks. When something reminds you of a traumatic event, maybe like a podcast, you're listening to a podcast in detail of something that took place, a race-based crime or a hate crime. Again, you might have nightmares. You don't even have to be there in order for the trauma to be triggered by the trauma. So if you watch the bear as he was running, that's how race-based trauma or stress feels all the time. You can't shut the car off. So even when a threat is not there, there is a heightened aware that it may come at any moment. So with that, if we go back to our triangle, there's an increased substance use, including alcohol, that in some instances is being used to cope with the distress of racial trauma, self-medication, more aggressive behavior, consistent exposure to racism can leave you feeling concerned about your safety, which may result in increased aggression in an attempt to better protect yourself or your loved ones. Let me give you an example. So again, I'm in a suburban school, and the SRO happened to be in the office. I happened to come out of my office with the art teacher. This is a personal example. And I'm walking down, I'm not even paying attention, and I look up and I see the officer there, and immediately, right, physiologically in my body, I could feel my heart beating faster. I could feel my hands begin to sweat. My white colleague standing next to me, we're walking together to the art room. She has no clue that I'm feeling this way on the inside, right? And here's the thing, if you saw in my introduction, I put on a uniform. I put on a Beloit Police Department uniform. I drive a squad car, but yet and still, I was triggered. Not because of what I've heard, what I've seen, all those things I have lived, my life experience still triggered me when I knew I was good. Historical trauma plus racial trauma equals post-traumatic slave disorder. So when we talk about the post-traumatic slave disorder, you can remember it with 3 letters, MAP, M-A-P. M for multi-generational trauma, together or coupled with oppression, A, the absence of the opportunity to heal or to access the benefits available to heal in society, leads to P, post-traumatic slave syndrome or post-traumatic slave disorder. And we're going to hear from the guru, Dr. Joy, in exactly, because she explains it way better than I do, what that is.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma. One of the things that's difficult for people is their first response is, oh my God, that happened so long ago. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on. And then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes, so 300 years of trauma, no help, freed. No help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families and their children and generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African American experience, starting with slavery, as a real clear, long enduring trauma. I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as, well, cultural. There's adaptive behaviors, survival behaviors. Well, what are they? Let's just say 2019, you have a black mother and a white mother. The sons go to school together. They find themselves at a meeting. The black mother leans over to the white mother and says, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed that your son is really doing quite well. And the white mother's response is, oh, thank you. She begins to go on and on about he won the science fair, his uncle's an astronaut. She's just oozing. She realizes the black mother's son is actually excelling her son. And she says, well, wait a minute. Your son's the one that's really coming along. And the black mother responds, oh my God, he's a handful, but oh, he just works my nerves. Now, when I'm working with African American people, it doesn't matter what the audience is. It doesn't matter what class. If I were to ask, is she very proud while she's saying those denigrating things? And everybody laughs and goes, of course, there's a secret. Because everybody black knows that even though the black mother is going, oh my God, she's really proud. So now let's roll that scene back 300 years. And let's say this black mother is working in the fields and a white slave owner comes through and says, wow, that boy is really coming along. What is she gonna say? No, he's not. He's stupid. He's shiftless. He can't work because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect them. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment. The little white boy, say Timmy, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of me? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. PTSD is a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. You don't even have to be there to actually get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You could just hear about something horrific happening to someone you love. So you have people who have experienced it firsthand, people who have witnessed it in their environment, right? People who are continuing to be oppressed. That exacerbates any possibility of healing. So it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, because then it becomes part of what we call your socialization process. So you begin to normalize a way of living and being, everything from what we eat to what we believe it means to be a friend. All of these things are colored by history. And if you don't understand it, you're going to fold in things that you've just assumed are normal. But post-traumatic stress disorder, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future. There was a point where there were African American children in different urban settings that didn't expect to live to be adults because they saw so much death, that they started planning their funerals like at 13, 12, as young as 10. When you start looking at the simple biology, you start looking at the impact of stress on health. And while we look at general stress, we know finances, you have illnesses, all these different things. How about being black? How does factoring in being black in America impact your stress level and therefore your body's ability to operate its own immune system? Because we know it compromises the immune system. Once you understand it, then you can deal with it. Because you see, it's habitual. You're socialized. It becomes part of your being. So one of the ways you begin to address that multi-generational trauma is to work with the people it directly impacts, to hear from them. And when you give the people the information, they can use it. I think the first order of business is beginning to have a conversation. And the other is to educate the larger society. You have to stop the assault. So this is not purely a clinical thing. This requires social justice and change. That's where part of the healing is. It's not in a clinical setting or in a pill. It's in fairness and justice and safety and equity. We got to work with some of those clinical things, some of those issues of panic and anxiety. And we also have to deal with the fact that you have a system that is set up to oppress you and to continue to injure you. Both those things have to be dealt with. And they cannot singularly by themselves affect a change. They have to be done collectively.
So with Dr. Joy, and just reiterating what I had stated earlier about post-traumatic slave disorder and how it's intergenerational, and we see it even, I teach in a JK through 5th grade school. I even see it at the lower grades. So even in JK, I can identify, that's a post-traumatic slave disorder. It's not an outburst, not just being angry. That is, you can trace that back historically. And so one of the things that I teach my staff is one or two things. It's either classroom management or it's trauma. For me, there's no in between. It's either trauma or classroom management. Whichever one it boils down to, it's not the student. It's not the student's fault. Whichever one, it's not. They're not responsible for their reaction in that moment. It's either classroom management that is not being carried out, or it's a traumatic event or events that have happened to that child. So what are the racial impacts of learning and behavior? Psychologically, racial trauma can cause symptoms that mirror those of post-traumatic stress disorder, as Dr. Joy talked about. There's arousal, there's a higher report of distress. So stomach aches, headaches, rapid heartbeat, greater perception of behavioral problems and chronic stress. As Dr. Joy talked about, chronic stress on the body, which leads to high blood pressure, which leads to diabetes, which leads to all of those things because it's a revving car. It is always present. Always present. Why? Because it could cost me my life. To be what I like to call in the green zone, right? Could cost me my life. So I always have this arousal, this hypervigilance. So something's going to happen. Something's going to pop off. Something's going to be a trigger to me. And so again, what does that do? That plays on the body. It lessens the immune system, right? And so being aware of that, I'm very much aware as a woman of color, when that stress is happening to me, I have some tools that will help me. However, it does not always just take it away. So the arousal, the high reports of stress and the greater perception of behavioral problems and chronic stress and negative emotion is a big one. So depression, anxiety. And so one of the studies was showing that Black and Latinx middle school have a higher rate of depression in the context of discrimination. So that the hypervigilance is there, avoidance, less willing to take academic risk, higher high school dropout. And this is after the racial discrimination is perceived. So if I perceive it, it will decrease my chances of taking an academic risk, my chances of taking AP classes, or my chances of taking the lead even in my college courses or group projects. So again, being very aware of how racial trauma affects the entire life. It affects your entire life, not just an area, as Dr. Joy was talking about.
Hi, Mom, it's me. I got in trouble again at school today.
Hi, this is Miss Jones again. I'm finding your son very disruptive in class, more so than other students.
I feel like the teacher doesn't like me. Other kids do bad things, but they don't get in trouble.
He's defiant and shows a real lack of respect for any structure or authority.
I hate school because the teachers are always mean to me and I don't feel like I'm learning anything.
I'm really concerned about his behavior.
I'm always getting in trouble for what I didn't do.
We're going to have to adopt a zero-tolerance policy, young man.
School keeps calling my mother, and she gets really, really mad at me.
What is going on? You'd better explain.
I feel like the whole world is just turned up against me and doesn't like me anymore. There are days I get up and I just decide I'm not going to school.
And we go to the park, like everybody's always telling me I'm not worth anything, so what's the point of trying?
I know the cops are watching, but we just hope we don't get caught.
In our triangle.
Your son's absences are a problem. They will definitely affect his grade point average.
Academic
I don't
risk.
feel safe in my class anymore.
Should I assume you're unprepared again today?
I would always eventually get picked on by the teacher. He makes examples of me.
I feel really singled out, and I just try to avoid people because every time I look, somebody's always talking about me. Oh, she's always getting in trouble.
Perceived threat.
But I started fighting more because nobody wants to hang out around a troublemaker. The only time I have real friends is when I'm on the block. So that's where I'll stay.
I'm sure you understand we take our discipline policies very seriously here at the school.
Institutions that have
What are we going to do
set us up for
about
failure.
your son?
So at my level, what it might look like, because again, it starts before we're even born. It starts before we're born because our mothers and then our grandmothers and then great-grandmothers, it's intergenerational. So before we even born, that's why it's 0 to 36 months, it begins to affect us. The adverse conditions or the traumatic experiences that our mother may have experienced, right? It is passed down to us even in utero. It's there. And so we have to be very aware that of the racial trauma that our parents, our grandparents experienced. We pass it down and we pass it down and we pass it down. And that's what we see in classrooms. That's what we see at doctor's offices when we're saying, I got this pain, but they can't find it. So if you see that young children, their perception of safety is related to their parent, their caregiver. And if they feel like my caregiver is not going to be around to take care of me, well, then that heightens their own stressors. And it affects their own, it impacts their own emotional availability for their children. And with that being said, their ability to protect them from the world, right? So your BIPOC parents that have to have the talk. Right. That's huge. That's a huge stressor on the body, physiologically, psychologically, emotionally, when you know that you have to have the talk and that talk is getting younger and younger and younger. You know, maybe it was 15, 13, 8. So we're just going to move quickly through this. It just shows how it keeps progressing. It does not let up. It keeps progressing. It affects the appetite. It affects sleepy, sudden movements. I have students that if you drop a book, they're under a table. So again, for me, I understand what that is, but I have to sometimes educate my staff. Like, you know, he's just not under there for, because he's trying to find a pencil. He's under there because that has triggered him in his body physiologically. He is feeling that the pressure or the stressors. And so his safe place is underneath the table. 6 through 11, still their view of the media, because they're not yet understanding everything, but what they do pick up on is how their families are responding, right? And so that stress from dad If dad is stressed out about whatever just happened on the television or in the community, we pass that on to that child. And so then that child now has some preoccupations with their safety, with their friends. They wonder who can they turn to, the distractibility and the problems, distractibility in school that then causes problems, which then, right, our institution has set us up to fail. Zero tolerance policies. Again, it's just keep spiraling and spiraling and spiraling. And I'm going very quickly because I had to cut down my presentation quite a bit. Again, as we go through the high school and the young adult age, they have a better understanding. They understand the implications of racial trauma. They become fixated on the events. They try to find ways, sometimes risky behaviors, to deal with the anxiety that they are feeling, right? Because what goes on in this house stays in this house. And statistically, BIPOC families, we are changing the narrative, but we don't seek out counseling because we view it as an institution, right? And the institution has failed us or set us up to fail. And so therefore we don't sometimes seek out counseling, seek out therapy. So that our high school age children will seek risky behaviors or drop out of, or stop coming to class, those kind of things to cope and deal with the anxiety that they are feeling, especially with social media. So when I think about how to counteract, right, we have what we call RTI or remedial ways to help children, response to intervention. And so for me, I have a RTI or racial literacy intervention. And I'm not going to get through the whole entire thing to respect your time. But at the bottom tier, we have universal. Everybody's getting the same teaching, right? Personal and social identity, non-Eurocentric history. And let me give you an example of that right quick. So I've been in my classrooms, and they've been telling the story of Rosa Parks. Now, I've got the same story about 5 or 6 times in my school. And in my mind, I'm thinking, do we not know anybody else besides Rosa? To add insult to injury, the story of Rosa wasn't even being told properly. And so when I began to tell the real story of Rosa and what happened, one of the teachers said, "Are you sure that happened that way?" And I was like, "What?" She's like, "Are you sure that happened that way?" Yes. And I said it in a very respectful way. We have this wonderful tool. It is wonderful. It's called Google. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. And then I said, if you don't even want to go to Google, we have 22 books in our library on Rosa Parks. I went through every one of them to see which ones told the correct story and which ones told the story through a Eurocentric lens. Out of the 22, only 2 told the story through a Eurocentric lens. So for me, again, as a woman of color, that says either you chose not to find the information or you didn't want to present the information. I'm not sure which one it is. I'm not making a judgment call there. But the information is right in the library. 20 of our books tell the correct story. Only 2 don't. The second tier is for students that may be struggling. And so we do some more intense interventions. Infinity Spaces, we do school-wide restorative practices. We do, again, that's where I come in to talk to the students who may be transgressing or having trouble processing, right? Because the universal level goes against what they've been taught. So they're going to go home and they're going to say, this is what the story is, right? So now that we've got a family that's struggling with correct information, right? Opposed to what they've been taught or what they've heard or what they passed down. So now we've got a conflict. And so those students come back and then they need some more intensive interventions. Tier 3 is for our most intense that, so white supremacists, that's what we use our racial literacy, our tier 3 for. I'm going to apologize because I am moving expeditiously through this information. Restorative social emotional trauma practices. We know about restorative practices, but what about restorative social emotional trauma practices? to provide a structure for students to heal, to make connections, to express their feelings, to have trusted relationships with adults so they can move forward in a supportive and positive way. We heard earlier that with students, they don't feel without the right and proper interventions, you just keep perpetuating this racial trauma in the community, in the campuses, in our elementary schools, in our stores, wherever. We are just perpetuating it over and over again. What can educators do? Learn about the impacts of history and systemic racism, create safe and supportive and brave environments, right? We talk about courageous conversations. And so just having those safe spaces, model and support honesty and authenticity. Encourage and empower students as leaders. And then here's what I always say, just this is the professional counselor coming out of me, and then care for yourself. Make sure you're getting care. Racial literacy as a student well-being, right? Again, without racial literacy, it could cost, as we saw Dr. Joy, it could cost us our lives without having the racial literacy that we need. Now, when I say we, I mean, that's universal. Everybody's getting it. Everybody's having racial literacy or getting instructed in racial literacy because I can use my privilege over here, right? I have done that even in Wauwatosa where I'm at, right? I wanted to, for Black History, I wear Black History t-shirts. And so I went to somebody that are my ally and I'm like, hey, if you put this out, it'll go through. Not only did she put it out, but she listed Black merchandisers that they could purchase their shirts from. My ally, right? I knew where to go to get this done. And this is my favorite slide. Yeah, but Kenda, yeah, but that's my question slide. Like, yeah, but. Any yeah, buts? Again, respecting your time. Any comments? I'm not looking at the chat, so I can't really tell.
I have a question.
Yes.
Not so much a yeah, but question. So you had mentioned that BIPOC folks don't always seek out counseling because they view it as an institution. I work in services for students with disabilities, and we know that disability affects all races, but we see fewer of our BIPOC students coming and seeking services from us. So I was just wondering if you had any suggestions on how our office might better outreach to our BIPOC students and encourage them to come in and get services for disabilities if they are a student with disabilities.
Excellent question. I would just suggest that just keep advertising, keep asking, keep promoting where you're at, because for BIPOC, the BIPOC population, right? The more you come, because they're waiting for you to just stop, because that's what they're used to, right? We're used to just stopping. Like eventually you're going to give up, right? That's a part of the intergenerational. I'm going to give up. I'm going to say, like the mom was saying, oh, he's sluggy, he's lazy, he's this. So to come back several times, to keep coming, says you care, right? The old adage, we don't want to know how much you know until we know how much you care. And so even for myself as an African-American woman, as a counselor, as a licensed professional counselor, I struggle with getting clients in that look like me. So I'm out at fairs and different places just promoting mental health, mental wellness for the BIPOC population. I would just say, keep promoting, keep doing what you're doing, because they're looking for you to stop showing up, because that's the norm. That's what we have normalized in our mind. Like eventually it'll leave us alone. If you go back to the slave owner and the mom, right? Eventually, if I just say this, then he won't keep coming back. He won't keep coming back. So just keep promoting what you offer, promote it in a multicultural, diverse, equitable way so that they know if possible, if you could, have some representation. I'm not saying you don't. In my building, I don't. I'm the only African-American woman in my building. So representation really helps.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite quotes about healing of racial trauma. As a people of color living in America and around the world, continue to be impacted by racism and racial trauma, we will need the grace of God, God's grace, stamina, and resilience to stay. And so that just kind of sums it up. Again, back to your question about getting them into receive your services. There's that stamina and the resilience, the stamina to just keep going and going back. And I know that's hard. It's hard work. I'm not going to act like it's not. It's hard work. The racial battle fatigue that I go home with every day is on top of the job that I already do, is insurmountable some days, but it's worth every bit of it. It's worth it. Some resources. Racial trauma support and diversity resources. I utilize the melanin and mental health a lot. It's one that I utilize. References. My contact information. And I got 5 minutes to spare. Look at me. Again, I shortened up my presentation quite a bit because there's a lot more information, but I just, again, honoring your time. No questions. Well, I want to thank you again for coming out on this slump night. I want to wish you an amazing pump day on purpose. Have an amazing, fantastic Friday on purpose. Thank you so very much. I truly appreciate your time on tonight.
Thank you so much, Kenda.
Thank you.